here for our September webinar series for our certified firms and other attendees, special guests, and so on. As everybody trickles into the room here and gets started, I'm just going to start off by introducing myself, as I always do. Hi, I'm Gavin McMahon, the Certified Firms Supervisor here at IICRC. I've been with the company 8 years now, almost, so it's been a wild ride. And I'm here to answer any questions that anybody may have along the way. If I can answer them, I certainly will right away in real time. You can just use the chat feature on the bottom of your Zoom page there if you have any questions along the way. Any questions for Robbie, I'll save till the end, and then we'll go ahead and ask the questions and hopefully get an answer out of him. Speaking of Robbie, Robbie is our Director of Government Relations. He goes to the Supreme Court and House of Representatives and the President, and he talks to all the government officials and tries to help get laws passed and, make sure to spread the word of remediation, restoration, cleaning, and try to get fair legislation passed. And we're happy to have him tell us a little bit about what he does for the IICRC. And every time I see the guy, I feel like I'm congratulating him for something. He's really doing a great job passing the bar and getting married and all that fun stuff. But enough about that. I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Robbie.
Cool. Thank you, Gavin. So everybody, my name is Robbie Bradshaw. I am the Director of Government Relations for the IICRC. My job, like Gavin said, is to basically talk with policymakers, with regulators about the IICRC, about our certifications, the standards that we have, and what exactly the restoration and the cleaning and inspection industries do. And it's really pivotal around this time period because there's a lot of legislation and regulation on indoor air quality, on disaster recovery and things like that. And so we need somebody to kind of watch what's going on with legislation and regulation, and then inevitably, what we can do to provide a voice. And so a little bit about me. Let me see if this. Here we go. So I was born and raised in Portsmouth, Virginia. I have a bachelor's degree in political science from Old Dominion University, which you may have recently heard beat Virginia Tech in football last weekend, and a law degree from Regent University. I'm a licensed attorney here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I was hired on by the IICRC in 2021. That is when IICRC Advocacy and Government Relations started. And a fun fact about me, I am a musician and I love golf. So those are my fun facts. So a lot of people ask me when I first kind of get into this is what is advocacy? And hold on, let me go back there. So advocacy is really about giving our industry a voice. A friend of mine over at ISSA, John, he talks about the idea, and this is a common phrase in the lobbying and government relations world, is that if you don't have a seat at the table, then you're on the menu. And for a really long time, the restoration industry and the cleaning industry have just been on the menu. They've, nobody pays attention to us because nobody is there talking about what we do and why we do it and why it's so important. And so it's really about educating policymakers about restoration and cleaning and ensuring that our laws and our regulations reflect our standards and our certifications because, and I'll get into this a little bit later, but our standards are not just important to our industry, it's also important to the consumer and important to policymakers. And then it really all boils down to what and why we do what we do. The IICRC is about, getting those standards out, getting our certifications out, educating the industry so that when we walk into a consumer's home, they're protected, that they are getting the best job, whether it be carpet cleaning or fire damage restoration, that people are following standards and they're certified, they have the education needed to perform those duties properly. And inevitably, it is a consumer protection mechanism. So then you kind of ask yourself, for you all, why should advocacy matter? Well, number one, advocacy, if we're advocating for certifications, we're advocating for standards, it helps to weed out those unqualified individuals and companies from cutting corners. For those companies that aren't paying attention to standards, aren't following them, aren't certified, that when you go to to a consumer or to a business owner and say, hey, here's my invoice. I'm following the S500. And another company comes up and they say, well, we can, remediate your or restore your home from the water or business from the water damage. And you're like, that you look at the two invoices and one of them's drastically different. Well, they're not following standards. But it's hard to explain that to a business owner or a homeowner who's got to pay the bill. And so if everybody has to follow the standard, everybody has to be certified, then that kind of weeds out those unqualified individuals. It also ensures that your certifications are recognized and are valuable. They're valuable right now to you. They're valuable to most insurance companies. But what if the government recognized it? What if your state recognized that this WRT or this CCT or AMRT, you have to have this or you need this, or, we only utilize these people for government contracting and things like that. And so therefore, your certification automatically goes from here to up here. It's more valuable to not just you and insurance companies, but it's invaluable to the consumer and the policymakers. And then that also inevitably builds trust with your certified firms. It's a certified firm webinar, so everybody's a certified firm. And so it builds that trust that IICRC certified firms are the ones to go to. They're the important ones. And those are the ones you need to look for when you're looking to have your carpets cleaned, to have your house restored after a fire, your mold remediated, all that kind of stuff. And so a lot of people ask me, okay, well, so what? We have our standards, we have our certifications, but do legislators and regulators really even care about IICRC certifications and standards? And the fact of the matter is, yes. In 1996, President Clinton signed into law the National Technology and Transfer Act. And this says that all federal agencies, no matter what, if they are instituting policy and they have a policy objective, they have to look to voluntary consensus-based standards and standards developing organizations and adopt those standards before ever developing their own. So let's say that FEMA wants to adopt a carpet cleaning standard, right? Well, they would have to look to voluntary consensus-based standards, i.e. the S100, and any other carpet cleaning standard that might exist. And they would have to, as long as it meets their policy objective, they would have to incorporate that standard by law. And so you would go, hey, but the reason that advocacy is so important is that those folks, the policymakers, the regulators, don't exactly know that the S100 exists unless they happen to stumble upon us via Google. And so that's why it's my job when I see in this instance with FEMA and carpet cleaning, let's just say that FEMA issues a regulatory notice that says, hey, we're looking at adopting carpet cleaning standards. We need public comment. And that's when it's my job to say, hey, did you know the IICRC exists and that there's an S100? And therefore that gives us a better opportunity for that standard to be incorporated by reference. And the certification is required by law. So there are multiple states, and frankly, I went with the radon programs because they're very similar to us. NRSB and NRPP are both nonprofit certifications, just like the IICRC. They're just in the radon sphere. And there's 10 states that require radon mitigators or assessors, or inspectors, I guess they call them, to have certifications. And then there's 14 states that require those radon professionals to adhere to ANSI AARST standards. I believe AARST has now changed their name to something else, but they're still ANSI accredited standards. And so in other words, utilizing IICRC certifications and ANSI standards is not some sort of, wild idea. It's just, most states have not done it as of right now. Virginia, Kentucky, Illinois, Florida, Texas, Louisiana, DC, they have all in some way, shape, or form utilized IICRC certifications and or IICRC's S520 for their mold-related regulations. And so when we're talking about fire and water and carpet cleaning and upholstery cleaning, all this kind of stuff, when they're looking at regulating those industries in some way, shape, or form, we know that there are good players in the industry that are already certified. They're already following the standards. And so we need to inform those regulators and those policymakers that, hey, these certifications, these standards exist. And the U.S. government has actually, the federal government at least, has relied on consensus-based standards forever. And it mitigates their cost because the federal government doesn't have to go out and create. They don't have to find all the experts and develop these standards themselves. And so what they do is they take the standard and they just say, hey, instead of copy and pasting 80 pages of the S500 or whatever, what they'll do is just say, hey, the S500 is the law of the land. So this has led to the use of technical and voluntary consensus-based standards in 23,000 sections of the Code of Federal Regulations. And since 2019, and I believe this number has actually gone up, there have been over 387 pieces of legislation that have referenced ANSI specific standards. Not necessarily all of our standards, of course, but these are standards from ASHRAE, from NFPA, from ICC, all these other large nonprofit organizations that the federal government relies on them to develop these standards and these certifications. So most of the time people ask me, okay, so what are we exactly pushing? What is the IICRC advocating for? So one of the main areas of our policy focus is mold remediation. And the reason that it happens to be, it's not that we are actually pushing it necessarily, but a lot of policymakers, I would say every politician I've ever ran into has said, I have a tenant or a homeowner that has called me about a mold problem. Mold is a very pervasive issue here in America as well as elsewhere. And therefore, policymakers almost always have at least one phone call. I've met policymakers who themselves have had poor remediation done and wanted to do something about it, most notably in Virginia and Massachusetts. So mold remediation is just somewhere where the IICRC, we kind of find ourselves in because we have the S520, because we have the AMRT and the MRS. But more so, we also work in the trauma and crime scene cleanup industry and working on legislation like that. Georgia passed a bill a few years back that required, people in the trauma and crime scene industry to register with the state. They now look to our TCST certification to see if they have that when they're going to register. And there's a bill I'll talk about a little bit later in New Jersey that is attempting to regulate that industry. And so it's important to talk about that. It's also notably, as of yesterday, I believe, the S900 dealing with fentanyl and other drug residue cleanup, that standard was published. And I'm already working on regulatory responses in Alaska for the S900 and fentanyl cleanup and methamphetamine site cleanup. So we're definitely always working in that industry. And in fire restoration, it's huge. Right now, we're seeing a lot of fire restoration legislation dealing in the wildfire area, of course, in California and elsewhere. But we're also seeing a lot of kind of negative connotations with fire restoration, with fire chasing and trying to end that type of business model. And so in seeing those bits and pieces of legislation, we're working with other stakeholders to try and draft up legislation that recognizes standards, that recognizes certifications, and also gets those bad actors out from under the definition of what people think of restoration. And then workforce development. I'm sure if you are an owner of a certified firm, you're always struggling to find workers, to find people that can come and help employees of your business. And so we've been working on the workforce development side of things to try and get more folks that are coming from high school and college to notice and recognize the restoration industry as a career path. And so that's one of the big areas that the IICRC has been advocating for the last few years now. And so here I'm going to kind of give you guys some breakdowns of a couple of updates on legislation, as well as some legislation that we've seen. The Virginia HB 2195, you may be familiar with the bill that passed last year that required IICRC certifications. The legislator that put forth that bill actually wanted to change it. They wanted to get rid of that, and they wanted to pass a more comprehensive licensure bill. And so when I saw the bill, I called them and I said, hey, do you have some issues with last year's bill? Like, what can we do to fix this? And so I went up to Richmond, Virginia, and met with probably 5 or 6, 7. I think there was probably 7 or 8 of us in the office, in the room. And we all just talked about what we're looking for, what everybody wants. And so the bill was inevitably amended. They didn't move towards a licensure bill. We got them off of that pathway. And we said, all right, what are you looking for? And they said, well, we want to make sure that people that are going in and remediating homes are educated, that know what they're doing, and that it's being done properly. And I said, well, the best way to do that is to make sure that they're certified and that they're following a standard. And so inevitably the bill was amended from last year, or the law was amended from last year. So now really any nationally or internationally recognized certifying body and certification is applicable in Virginia. So NORMI, ACAC, IICRC, those types of certifications. But You also have to follow and you have to remediate mold in accordance with the S520 or the 2008 EPA guidelines dealing with commercial buildings. I advocated strongly that we don't push for the EPA guidelines, mainly just because of their outdated nature and their focus on commercial buildings. But I was only one voice in a room of 8, but the S520 wouldn't have gotten in there if it wasn't, and probably we would have gone down a path of licensure if the IICRC's representative myself was not there. This also created a mold committee or a committee to study the mold industry in Virginia. And so if you're from Virginia, you definitely got I hope at least that you got our survey to kind of ask questions about what you do, how you do it. And I was appointed to serve on that board. We went through the board and they've developed a report that they're going to give back to the legislature, more so focused on landlord tenant issues than anything else. That's what we kind of came up with. So there might be some legislation next year. I don't know, but we shall see. And then a mold certification bill, which is kind of a copy and paste bill from the Illinois bill that passed last year. This bill was only introduced, but I've been working with some IICRC certified folks and an IICRC certified firm in Iowa. That basically what it does is it establishes a registry for people that perform mold remediation services. So really what you have to do is you have to show that your direct supervisors have an industry certification, whether that be NORMI, IICRC, ACAC, whatever. But you have to, in order to get on that registry that consumers can go to and look and find, qualified mold remediators, you have to have an industry certification. But you also have to perform mold remediation in accordance with the industry standard of care, which is, obviously the S520. And so that bill, we've seen multiple iterations of that in Iowa. We've been pushing it in West Virginia and other places. And so those types of bills will come up. If you're interested in helping out with those types of bills, feel free to reach out. We can talk about that later. Trauma and crime scene cleanup. I briefly chatted about this one at the beginning. This is a bill that was introduced actually last year, but it's still out there and viable. And basically, the bill regulates the trauma and crime scene cleanup industry in New Jersey. We're working with multiple stakeholders on this, and this would, at least the way that it's currently written, would require that each employee needs to be licensed by the division as a biorecovery specialist, which would be a training certificate like the TCST. And then also anybody that is a key employee or a direct supervisor, key employees more so defined in the bill, have to be certified by ABRA, and also provide a written statement that they acknowledge and know about the S540. We've been working on some legislative and some language changes there. But for the most part, the bill has not moved yet. But these are the types of bills that we're seeing when it comes to trauma and crime scene. A lot of the trauma and crime scene we are also seeing deals with regulation. A lot of people, or a lot of states rather, have victim compensation programs where they provide funds for crime scene cleanup. And so one of the big things that the IICRC pushes for is, hey, you're providing money to victims and their families, and we fully support that. But it's also important that those victims and their families are protected, and make sure that people that are cleaning up these crime scenes that you're providing funds to know what they're doing, or following the S540 standard, and are certified. So that's where we're at with trauma and crime scene cleanup. And then fire restoration. So this was kind of a new bill that I had never seen up until this year. A bill in Connecticut, 6965, would require that the state fire marshal license fire and catastrophic restoration businesses. It also creates a registry for the businesses. This bill is very similar to the Georgia trauma crime scene bill, except frankly, all that it did was just said, hey, you have to pay the state of Connecticut $150 and you're on the registry. And so we went to the legislator and a couple of the stakeholders that were pushing the bill. And I said, well, what is the reason for this bill? And they said that there were fights outside of fire scenes. Fires would happen, and there are these random restoration companies or folks that claim they're restoration companies showing up, and just having conversations with the homeowners. Mind you, they're in a bit of shock. Everything that they ever owned is probably up in flames at the moment. And while the fire is still being put out, there was a fire, or there was a fight. And so they said, well, we want to curb that. And I said, well, there's nothing stopping these bad actors from just paying $150 and continuing to do what they're doing. And so I said, have you ever heard of the S700? Have you ever heard of, the FSRT or the IICRC and certifications and standards? And they said they hadn't. And I said, well, I really think that we should amend this language to showcase those. And inevitably, the bill did not pass. It had a hearing. Didn't go any further than that. I do suspect that it would be brought up again. But the idea of a restoration license bill has been a kind of interest to other states. We've heard interest in Texas and Minnesota, in Maryland, and elsewhere, and New Jersey, I believe. So I think that these might be coming down the pipeline, but that's why it's important for us as the IICRC to say, hey, there's already an industry that a sector of this industry that is following standards, that is certified. Why don't you just recognize those when it comes to licensure or whatever? And so this is something to be on the lookout for. We're definitely seeing it, and I'll be interested to see what Connecticut chooses to do this year. And then workforce development. So again, like I said, we're really pushing to try and get more people involved and into the industry of cleaning and restoration. And so you've probably heard of the One Big Beautiful Bill. It's a very lengthy reconciliation bill that was signed into law by the president on July 4th. But there was a small section there that you probably didn't hear about on CNN and Fox News and MSNBC, is that there's the Freedom to Invest in Tomorrow's Workforce Act. Now, this is a bill that we've been working on at the IICRC with multiple stakeholders for a few years now. And basically what it does is it allows people to utilize their 529 savings plans to obtain post-secondary credentials. So these include certifications. Now, we're still currently in the process of figuring out which certifications they would cover under from the IICRC. And I will provide a huge email once we kind of finalize those numbers. Right now, I believe the MRS is the one that specifically is kind of called out in the bill because it is ANAB accredited. But outside of that, we're trying to figure out which ones can work and which ones can't. And then we'll provide that so that you can go to your local high schools or even your current employees who may not be certified yet and just say, hey, do you have a 529 savings plan? Because if you do, you might be able to utilize those to pay for these certifications. And that way you, as the business owner, don't necessarily have to pay for it. So just an idea. And and again, we'll as time goes on, we're going to try and figure out which ones exactly are covered, if not all of them. And hopefully they are all covered in that way. Folks can utilize those savings plans, which, by the way, I don't think I went through it. 529 savings plans are currently, or prior to July 4th, we're pretty much only allowed to use for college related issues and college related costs. So, textbooks and things like that. And so what we were advocating for was shifting that to say, okay, it's not just a 529 college savings plan, it's a 529 career savings plan. So you can use it for college or you can use it to further your career in whatever industry you want. And obviously we're pushing the cleaning and the restoration industry. And so a lot of people, okay, well, yeah, you're doing all this kind of stuff, but is it working? Well, the IICRC specifically was mentioned in 9 bills this year. 9. That's the most that I've ever seen. When I first started, the IICRC wasn't mentioned in a single one. The year after that, the IICRC wasn't mentioned in a single one. Then the year after that, it was 1. Last year was a couple more, and this year was 9. So I do believe it's working. I'm getting calls from policymakers and regulators about, hey, can the IICRC help us with this? What can the IICRC do? Does the IICRC have this? And I think that's what's really showing that we are growing, that advocacy is moving in the right direction. Because it's not just me finding all this stuff, it's them finding us. And that's what's really important. And the IICRC has also had multiple representatives appointed to various government committees and commissions. We're currently working on one in Massachusetts to try and get restoration and cleaning professionals added to a task force on indoor air quality. Because right now they have a bill that basically says they have a task force for indoor air quality and the remediation of indoor air quality pollutants. But there's nobody that's currently listed on the task force that has any knowledge of remediation of indoor air quality contaminants. So we're working to try and get that language amended so that we can get some folks from Massachusetts onto that task force. And again, like I said, we're being contacted, which is really important. And so I do think that frankly, it is working. So, how can you get involved? You can join our advocacy group and become a leader in your state. It's a lot easier for me to say, hey, there's a bill in, let's say that you're in Montana, and I say, okay, well, there's a bill in Montana that is important. So I email that to you, and then you can kind of create a group of other restoration and cleaning companies that are willing to help and willing to kind of stretch the IICRC's tentacles into all these different state legislatures and federal legislatures. Um, as well as other countries. I mean, I'm an expert. Well, an expert is a stretch, but I have a lot of knowledge in state politics in here in the U.S. and federal legislation and regulation. But I don't have as much in other countries. So if you're from another country and you want to help and advocate alongside me and the IICRC, by all means, reach out. And we started doing something new this year to try and get more people involved, and that's quarterly advocacy updates. I will provide every quarter updates on different legislation. I will say it's going to be very heavy at the first quarter, so like that March time period, April time period. That's when all the state legislators are working, and so that January to May time frame is when a lot of bills are getting introduced or getting put into committee and passed. So those are going to be heavy. They'll be a little bit slimmer around now, but that doesn't mean we're not working, and that doesn't mean that we're not pushing for the next session. Because like I always say, a lot of July and August are slow, but it's mainly prepping for for the next year. And reach out to your policymakers. A lot of the time, I'll talk to IICRC certified folks and people that own certified firms, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I went to high school with a guy who's now a state rep." I'm like, "That's the person to reach out to." My wife's best friend is a state senator. Those are the types of connections that I don't have that you do, and those are huge. That's how we got the Iowa stuff is going with the mold bill. Is that and I'm meeting with them in a couple of weeks. Is that they're sitting there saying, "Well, oh yeah, I actually I knew this person in college, and now they're a state rep." They have power to get these types of bills put into place and become law. So that's really how you can get involved, is having those conversations. I'm more than happy to help you to be on the calls, the Zoom meetings, and the Teams meetings with you. So don't stress, like don't think it's intimidating or anything like that. I promise you, it's not that hard. Um, and This is another thing. The deadline for us to kind of pay for your hotel has passed, but if you're willing to come and pay your own way, it is a free event. You just got to pay to get there and to stay there. But the third annual IICRC's Educating the Advocate Symposium. This is a great opportunity for everybody to come to Las Vegas. We're gonna have State Rep Orrin Licker there. He's actually the Nevada State Representative for the IICRC. We are actually in his district, so he's going to come talk about advocacy. But it's a whole day filled with different speakers from. I've got John and Keith from ISSA. I've got Cole Stanton coming in from Massachusetts. We have a scientist from the Berkeley Lab in California that's coming to talk about fire odor and the best ways to mitigate it based on their research. So it's going to be a really good opportunity for everybody to get involved and also just to learn about more so what we're doing and how we can grow government advocacy here at the IICRC and how you can be a part of it. So feel free to come. Just let us know that you want to come, and we'll get you there. So, and I think at this point in time, that is it. So, I think Gavin, I'm open for questions if anybody has any.
Awesome. I'm trying to toggle my audio and video here. Yeah, so thanks for all that information, Robbie. That was super helpful, and it's really nice of you to take time out of your day to help us, get one of these webinars done for this month. So, appreciate you. Thank you
Yeah.
very much. Always a pleasure. And I'm not seeing any questions from any of our attendees. No hands up. Like that. Does anybody in the attendees over there have any questions about the information Robbie presented? Not seeing or hearing anything. So
Mm,
I think we'll just go ahead and close it up. And
sounds good.
for all those in attendance, as long as you're a certified firm with us, I'll be happy to give you that hour of continuing education credit you're looking for. That'll be posted to your account within the next 72 business hours, probably Monday or Tuesday, but you'll see it on your account there. And of course, if you have any questions for the IICRC or need help with your firm or anything else of that nature, you can always reach out to me as well. My direct email is gmcmahon, and that'll be at iicrcnorth.org. I'll be happy to field any of your questions there as well. Anything else you got to add, Robbie?
No, I'm trying to find out if my email is somewhere on there in case anybody wants to ask. I'll put it in the chat just real quick so everybody has it just in case they want to email me.
It's a good idea.
Uh, yeah, I just put it in the chat so anybody can yeah, and Gavin did his, so you feel free to reach out. And yeah, anybody has any questions or anything like that, I'm more than happy to answer.
Cool. That's all I got as well. So another successful webinar for the Certified Firm Series, and everybody have a great rest of your day.
Yeah.